Some storms don't come with thunder, they arrive in silence. Harrison Ford thought it would be just another interview, another polite chat beneath studio lights. But that morning on The View, something shifted. One smirk, one question. And suddenly, he wasn't facing a talk show host, he was facing everything he stood against in Hollywood. What happened next wasn't scripted, it wasn't rehearsed, it was real, and it shook the studio to its core. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. What happens when a Hollywood legend walks into a studio, expecting a polite conversation, only to find himself walking straight into an ambush? Well, you're about to find out. The studio lights were already blazing when Harrison Ford stepped onto the set of The View. He wore a dark leather jacket that matched the quiet storm in his eyes, the kind of calm that made people lean in, unsure whether to relax or hold their breath. He moved like a man who'd walked through too many fires to be shaken by stage lighting or forced laughter. As he took his seat, the chair barely creaked beneath him, but the tension in the room shifted, almost as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Across the table sat Joy Behar, grinning like she already knew something the audience didn't. Her cue cards rested in her lap, but Harrison's eyes weren't on her. Not yet. He was looking at the page poking out from the folder in front of her, just barely visible. The title read, "From Grumpy to Obsolete." His gaze lingered there for a beat longer than necessary, then flicked up to meet hers. Nothing in his face changed, but something in the air did. Even the cameras seemed to refocus. In the corner, a young assistant leaned into the producer's ear, whispering too loudly for comfort. He doesn't know about the debate format, they didn't tell him. The producer winced, but it was too late now. The wheels had been set in motion. Joy tapped her pen once against the desk, that signature smirk widening ever so slightly. Harrison sat perfectly still, not bored, not annoyed, just waiting, and that was what made it unsettling. Because when a man like Harrison Ford waits, it's not out of patience, it's out of calculation. The opening music faded. The red light above camera 2 blinked to life. America was watching. And no one on set knew that within minutes, they'd all be holding their breath, not because of what Harrison would say, but because of what he would refuse to ignore. The View was never meant to handle a storm like this, but the storm had just taken a seat. Joy didn't waste a second. The moment the theme music faded and the applause softened, she leaned forward, her smile too wide to be friendly. "Well, look who's here," she began, her voice laced with that familiar edge. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and now a grumpy old man who still mumbles through interviews. A few scattered chuckles rippled from the audience, unsure whether to laugh or hold back. The other hosts shifted in their chairs, eyes darting nervously between Joy and Ford like children watching a fuse spark toward a firework. Harrison didn't flinch, he didn't smile, he just turned his head slowly, deliberately to face her. His voice was low, measured, unmistakably calm. "I've never played an old man, Joy," he said. "I've just grown up with the audience. Maybe that feels old to you." The words landed without force, but they landed all the same. Somewhere in the back row, a man's laughter caught in his throat. The silence after Ford's reply wasn't just awkward, it was loaded, tense. The kind of quiet that hangs in the air when someone realizes the temperature just dropped and no one adjusted the thermostat. Joy blinked, clearly not expecting him to counter that quickly or that quietly. "Oh, come on," she said, reaching for her mug like it would ground her. "You've made a career out of playing the same guy in different costumes. The grumpy pilot, the grumpy archaeologist, the grumpy detective. I mean, do you ever get tired of growling at people for 2 hours and calling it acting?" The smile on her face was meant to say it was all in good fun, but her eyes gave it away. This wasn't playful, it was calculated. She wanted a reaction, and she thought she had him cornered. Ford didn't blink, he didn't even lean back. His stare stayed locked on her, steady as a storm. "You think that's what I do?" he said, "grumble and walk away with a paycheck." Joy shrugged. "Well, if the boots fit." There were a few more laughs this time, but they came with a nervous energy, the kind that follows a joke no one's sure they're allowed to laugh at. One of the other hosts coughed, clearly preparing to change the subject, but then thought better of it. Ford hadn't broken yet, but something in the room was bending. He glanced around the table, then toward the audience, his expression unchanged. His voice remained flat, almost too calm. "I came here to talk about a film," he said. "A story about resilience, risk, and remembering what matters. I didn't realize I walked into a roast." Joy smirked. "Don't be so sensitive. You're a big star, you can take it." "I've taken a lot of things," Ford said, his tone growing colder, quieter. "Criticism, failure, injuries, even crashes, but I've never mistaken cruelty for conversation." That stopped everything. Even the crew behind the cameras froze. The light above the lens blinked silently. Joy leaned back, the smile still on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. And Harrison sat there, not angry, not rattled, just still. Like a man who had learned a long time ago that silence was often louder than shouting. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't playing defense. He was watching, waiting, and whatever he was waiting for, everyone in that studio just realized they weren't ready. Joy wasn't finished, not even close. She leaned in again, her voice a little sharper now, the humor in her tone thinner, more brittle. "Some say you've been hiding out in the woods for years. That you're more afraid of social media than you are of box office flops." She laughed softly at her own line, but this time, not a single person joined her. Harrison didn't react right away. He sat still for a moment, hands folded loosely on the table in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped an octave, low, measured, the kind of voice that quiets a room without asking. "I live in Wyoming," he said. "Not to hide, Joy. I live there because there are people who need help where no one else can reach them." He paused, letting the silence speak before he did again. "I fly a helicopter out there, search and rescue, real work. No costumes, no cameras, just broken legs and lost hikers and weather that doesn't care what movies you made." Joy shifted slightly, caught off guard. One of the co-hosts gave a quick glance toward the control room, as if asking whether someone should cut to commercial. But the red light above the camera stayed on, and so did Harrison. "I didn't learn to fly to escape attention," he continued. "I learned because sometimes there's no time to wait for someone else to show up. Because a little girl went missing once, in the Tetons. Her parents were panicking, no one could get to her. The studio was frozen now. I found her, alone in a gully, hypothermic, scared, bleeding from a fall. I landed where they said it couldn't be done, carried her out, and handed her to her mother. That was the only reward I needed." Joy opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Harrison wasn't done. "You see, I don't play heroes for applause. I've done the real thing. No director, no script, just me and a battered rotor blade against the wind." He looked at her then, not with anger but something heavier, disappointment. Like a teacher looking at a student who chose mockery over meaning. "And you call that hiding?" A woman in the front row wiped at her eyes. Someone near the stage had stopped taking notes. The control room was silent, except for the faint hum of live broadcast equipment doing its job, capturing every breathless second. Joy tried to regain footing. "Well, that's very noble," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "But let's not pretend flying helicopters makes you untouchable to criticism." "I don't mind criticism," Harrison said. "I've earned it, I've survived it. What I mind is ignorance wrapped in sarcasm. I mind when people tear others down just to fill airtime." The words hung in the air, solid and undeniable. Joy looked around the table, but no one would meet her eyes. Ford turned slightly in his chair, addressing not just the panel, but the audience beyond the cameras. "I came here to share a film, a piece of work I believe in, and instead, I walked into a performance I didn't audition for. A character assassination disguised as journalism." He leaned back just a fraction, but it was enough. For the first time since the show began, Joy had nothing clever to say. And the audience, those watching in silence, in person or at home, began to see the shape of something else forming behind the smirks and hot lights. It looked a lot like truth, and it sounded like a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. Harrison sat still for a moment longer, then slowly turned to face Joy fully, folding his hands in front of him like a man preparing to deliver a truth no one asked for, but everyone needed. You mock me for playing familiar roles, he said, voice steady, eyes locked onto hers. But every time I step onto a set, I ask myself one question: what will the audience feel, not what they'll think about me? Not whether the critics will cheer, but what someone in the dark, sitting alone, carrying something heavy, will feel when the credits roll. Joy scoffed. It was sharp, dismissive, the sound of someone clinging to control. Oh, please, she said. People don't want another fantasy. They want honesty. They want the truth. Ford didn't blink. He leaned in just slightly. Truth, he said quietly. Then let's talk about that. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. And somehow that made it hit harder. You call this truth? You set traps disguised as questions. You push people into corners, not to learn who they are, but to provoke, to stir drama. You pretend it's journalism, but it's theater. Bad theater. Joy sat straighter, her smile thinning. Excuse me, I'm doing my job. People watch this show because we ask what others won't. No, Ford replied. They watch because it's a car crash. Because you've trained them to expect wreckage. You don't uncover truth, Joy. You manufacture spectacle. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself they were the same thing. The audience was still. So still, you could hear the hum of the lights. Joy's hands fidgeted on the table. She looked toward the other hosts, but they were motionless, caught between fear and fascination. One of them had dropped her pen without noticing. Ford's voice took on a sharper edge. You talk about honesty. Let's be honest then. You knew exactly what you were doing when you put that headline in front of you. From grumpy to obsolete, you knew I hadn't agreed to a debate, but you saw a chance to poke the bear. To make a moment. Joy tried to cut in, but he kept going. And what if I had snapped? What if I'd yelled, stormed out, fed your headlines like a good little scandal? Would that be enough for you? Another viral clip, another cheap laugh over someone else's dignity. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I didn't come here to fight, Ford said. I came here because I care about the work. Because even after 50 years, I still believe that stories can change people, can comfort them, challenge them, remind them they're not alone. He looked toward the audience now. But you, he said, motioning gently toward Joy, you take those stories, those fragile, hopeful things, and twist them into weapons. You turn people into punchlines. The camera operator shifted slightly, then stopped. Through the viewfinder, he saw something that made him go still again. A woman in the second row, gray-haired, hand pressed to her chest, tears slipping silently down her face. And for a moment, that image said more than any of them could. Joy's voice cracked the silence, brittle now. You think you're better than this show? Ford didn't answer immediately. He let the question hang. Then he spoke with a kind of sad clarity that filled the room. No. I think this show used to be better than what it's become. Joy narrowed her eyes, voice rising. We give people what they want. Do you, he asked, or do you just give them what keeps them watching? That landed hard. A gut punch dressed as a question. Ford turned slightly, looking down the lens of the camera for the first time since he arrived. I've spent my life trying to create something that gives people a little escape, a little light. You've spent yours dissecting that light until there's nothing left but heat. No one laughed, no one clapped. The studio was silent, and in that silence the truth didn't just hang in the air, it echoed. Joy's voice cut through the silence like a snapped wire. You're just a washed-up movie star clinging to old fame. The words hit the studio like a slap across the face. A collective inhale swept through the audience. One of the co-hosts flinched. Another stared down at her lap, suddenly finding the surface of the table deeply interesting. Harrison didn't answer, not at first. He rose slowly, the motion deliberate, and for a second it looked like the air around him had thickened. The overhead lights caught the side of his face, creased, weathered still. He didn't glare, he didn't smirk. He just stood there, framed by silence and resolve. Washed up, he said softly, the words hanging like smoke. You want to talk about that? Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I was 52 when I learned to fly, Ford continued, voice low, words clear. Not for fun, not to impress anyone. I learned because I knew someday someone would be stranded on a cliff or lost in the snow, and the difference between life and death might be whether or not I could reach them. He reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He placed it on the table, sliding it slowly toward Joy. The camera zoomed in instinctively, catching it in full view. Harrison Ford, kneeling beside a young girl, her ankle in a splint, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. The background was dense pine forest. The light was fading. There were no red carpets, no makeup trailers. Just a helicopter, a child, and a man in his 60s doing what had to be done. No reporters were there, he said. No headlines, no spotlight, just a kid who needed help. The image did something to the room. The audience didn't gasp. They didn't clap. They just stopped breathing for a moment. Joy stared at the photo, then up at him, then back again. "I don't do this," he said, motioning toward the stage, the lights, the waiting crew, "because I need the attention. I don't sit in this chair because I'm desperate to stay relevant. I do it because I believe stories matter, that they can heal, inform, inspire. But when I'm not telling stories, I live one, I act when no one is watching." Joy's hands were clenched now, resting tensely on the desk. "You want to know what I've done lately?" he asked, stepping closer. "I've flown into canyons to deliver supplies to rescue teams. I've pulled strangers out of wrecks before paramedics arrived. I've spent nights alone in freezing air, waiting for morning light to guide me down." He looked around the studio, and none of it came with applause. Joy's voice came back, thinner this time. "That's noble, but you still signed up to be here. You still came to promote a movie." "I came," he said, "with the understanding that we'd talk about art, about what moves people, about what connects us, not to be ambushed with snide comments and lazy insults wrapped in ratings." A few members of the audience shifted, uncomfortably now, not because of him, but because they were seeing something rare, unfiltered, real. Joy leaned forward again. "You think this makes you a better person, flying around in your hero cape?" Ford shook his head. "There's no cape, there's no costume, and I'm not interested in being better than anyone. But I will not stand here while you try to reduce a life of work and service to punchlines." He tapped the photo once gently. "You want something real? There it is, no script, no PR team. Just a man trying to help a child who couldn't help herself." The studio was still. Behind the cameras, a technician rubbed his eyes, pretending it was the light. In the second row, a younger man reached over and squeezed the hand of the older woman beside him. And Joy, who had mastered the art of the smug retort, who built a career off control, said nothing. Ford returned to his seat but didn't lean back. He sat forward, hands on the table, eyes locked ahead. "You wanted a moment," he said. "Congratulations, this is one." Then he leaned in slightly, and for the first time there was heat in his voice. "Now ask yourself, Joy, what are you going to do with it?" She looked away, not because she was out of comebacks, but because the room no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the truth, and the man who dared to bring it. Joy's voice cracked under the pressure, sharp and thin, like glass trying not to break. "Oh, please, you think that makes you some kind of hero? You're still just a difficult, arrogant actor who thinks the world owes him something." There was no echo in the room, no support from the other hosts, no chuckle from the crowd. The words fell flat, lifeless, landing on a floor that had shifted miles beneath them. Harrison didn't move. He didn't roll his eyes or shake his head. He just looked at her with the kind of stillness that doesn't need to defend itself. "I'm difficult," he said quietly, "because I care. I'm demanding because I respect the audience too much to give them less than what they deserve." He paused, but not for effect, for breath, for memory. "I wasn't always on magazine covers, Joy. I didn't grow up around cameras. I worked construction. I swung hammers for men who didn't know my name and didn't care if I had a dream." Joy shifted slightly, caught off guard by the sudden turn. "I was a carpenter," he continued, his voice now softer, not theatrical, just real. "There was a time when every crooked nail meant a family would sit at a table that wobbled. Every miscut meant I had wasted someone else's paycheck, so I learned to measure twice. I learned to build things right, the first time." He looked down for a moment, like the weight of that part of himself had surfaced without warning. "I took that with me into film, that same instinct, that same care, that same refusal to phone it in, because I knew how it felt to be invisible, to be broke. To show up and give everything you have just to be told it's not enough. Joy blinked, her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. The first time I auditioned, Ford said, they told me I had no presence. The second time, they told me to cut my hair. The third time, they didn't even let me finish the scene. I was turned down 6 times before someone finally said yes. Not because I was charming, not because I had connections, but because I didn't quit. A hush rolled across the studio like fog settling over still water. I had a wife, he said, 2 boys, rent due, a broken-down car and a toolbox with my name carved into it. So no, I wasn't looking to be famous. I was looking to survive. I was trying to build something that would last longer than the workday. The air felt heavy now, not uncomfortable, just full, as if the room itself had leaned closer to listen. You think I'm arrogant? He asked, his gaze returning to Joy. I'm not. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending that every man who holds his ground must be full of himself. Tired of having to explain that discipline isn't ego, that standards aren't attitude. That just because I speak low and expect a lot doesn't mean I think I'm better than anyone else. He paused again, not for drama, but because these weren't lines, these were scars. I've been humbled by machines I couldn't fix, by jobs I couldn't land, by scenes I couldn't nail. And every time I got knocked down, I got back up, not because I had something to prove, but because I didn't know how to stay down. A young man in the audience lowered his phone. He had stopped recording. Now he was just watching. Ford reached toward the photograph still lying on the desk. You see this, he said, and you call it noble, but that day I wasn't thinking about nobility. I was thinking about the look in that girl's eyes, about her mother waiting at the edge of the trail. I was thinking about what it would mean to not make it in time. He looked down the lens again, but this time his expression softened. I've been called a lot of things. Grumpy, cold, stubborn, maybe I am, but I've earned every wrinkle on this face, every bruise on these hands. I've failed more than you'll ever know, but I never stopped showing up. Joy stared at him, her jaw slightly clenched, but her eyes, there was something different now. Not fear, not defeat, something closer to recognition, maybe even respect, though she'd never admit it. Ford gave her a small nod. Not one of victory, one of understanding. Don't confuse stillness with emptiness, Joy, he said. Some of us have just learned how to carry things quietly. The audience didn't cheer, they didn't need to. Because in that moment, the man sitting at the table wasn't a celebrity. He was a carpenter again, and the only thing he was building now was the truth. Joy's voice cracked across the set like a whip, shrill and desperate. You don't get to walk away from me, Harrison, not while I'm still talking. He stopped mid-step, his back still to her, hands loose at his sides. For a moment, it looked like he might just keep walking. But then he turned, slow and steady, and the light caught his face again. Not angry, not triumphant. Just still and impossibly calm. I'm not walking away from you, Joy, he said, voice low and even. I'm walking away from what this has become. Joy's mouth opened, but he didn't give her time to fill the silence. I'm walking away from the kind of television that confuses cruelty with honesty, that rewards mockery, that treats dignity like it's disposable. He scanned the studio, letting his eyes rest briefly on the audience, on the hosts frozen in place, on the blinking red light of the camera. I've been in this business a long time, he said, long enough to know when a conversation becomes a performance, and when a performance forgets that it's supposed to mean something. The room was still again. Even the camera operator, hands on the rig, had gone motionless. Somewhere in the control booth, no one was calling cues. Ford took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just full. The kind of breath a man takes before he lets something go. I've lived a full life, he continued. I've loved, lost, built things with my hands, watched them break, and built them again. I've seen the world from the sky and from a garage floor. And through it all, I've tried to hold on to one thing, just one. He looked back at Joy, and this time there was something almost mournful in his eyes. Decency. He turned again slowly, taking a step toward the edge of the stage. Joy tried one last time, her voice smaller now, but still sharp. You think you're better than everyone else. That's what this is really about. Ford didn't stop this time, but he spoke, one hand at his side, the other brushing lightly against the photo still sitting on the desk. "No," he said, "I think we're supposed to be better, all of us." Another step. The lights above seemed to dim, though they hadn't changed. A crew member to the side lowered his headset and just stared. And then Ford paused one last time near the exit. He looked back, not at the panel, not at the cameras, but directly at the audience. "If I'm guilty of anything," he said quietly, "it's holding on to a little compassion in a world that keeps trying to burn it out of me." He let that hang for a beat. "And if that makes me weak in your eyes, Joy, then I'm sorry I wasn't cold enough for you." He walked off stage, his footsteps measured, fading into the backstage dark. The audience didn't move. The cameras didn't follow. For a full 10 seconds, no one said a word. Joy sat there, hand resting near the edge of the desk, face stiff, eyes forward, like someone who had just realized the conversation had ended long before she was ready for it to. One of the producers finally stood up behind the glass, signaling for commercial, but the camera operator didn't budge. He simply turned his lens away, slowly, almost reverently, then rested it down like someone placing a flag at half-mast. In that quiet, the studio no longer felt like a set. It felt like a church. And somewhere beyond the lights, a man who had flown rescue missions, carved furniture, and carried both stories and strangers through storms, disappeared behind a curtain, leaving only truth in his place. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget